Hi, and welcome to this presentation about the head-up display. In 2018, Airbus initiated a survey to collect feedbacks from the HUD trainers and HUD users. Based on your feedbacks from the field, we have identified guidelines and key recommendations for the use of the HUD that will be presented to you in the coming slides. Those updates are available to you via the FCOM and the FCTM. In this presentation, we will go through 4 different chapters. In the first chapter, we will see some generalities on the head-up display. In the second chapter, I will provide you with the recommendations for the use of the HUD by flight faces. There will be some animated videos in order to emphasize the recommendations. In the third chapter, we will see the key recommendations for the operational use of the HUD in all flight faces. And then, we will review what are the latest and future HUD enhancements. Let's start first with some generalities on the head-up display. The HUD is an instrument that provides the flight crew with trajectory-related symbols. The HUD superimposed flight-related symbols on the forward field of vision of the flight crew. This enables the flight crew to fly the aircraft with regards to external parameters. The HUD can be used in all flight phases. There is no need for continuous head-up and head-down scanning. Indeed, adequate information is continuously presented in the field of view of the flight crew. The scanning of the cockpit information for the pilot flying and the pilot monitoring, if dual HUD configuration is installed on board the aircraft, shall be adapted to include the head-up display. When using an HUD, the pilot flying and the pilot monitoring scan the navigation display and the ECAM. The task sharing is unchanged. If dual HUD is installed, it is recommended that both flight crew members use their HUD so that they share the same level of information. This is consistent with the Airbus philosophy. Lastly, the HUD contributes to significantly increase the situational awareness of the flight crew, particularly during the approach and landing phases by displaying trajectory-related symbols superimposed on the field of view of the flight crew. However, the navigation display remains the primary instrument for monitoring the aircraft position in relation to the area overflown and other traffic. Let's now see the recommendations for the use of the HUD by flight phases. So in this section, we will go through a flight during which I will provide you per flight phases with the recommendations and guidelines for the use of the HUD. Let's start first with the ground phase, that is to say the before and pushback start sequence. At the time of the flight, the HCU, the head-up combiner unit, will be deployed as it will be used for the rest of the flight. The recommendation here is to operate the HCU with one hand only. The flight crew should use the hand located on the side of the HCU handle. This is because the deployment or the stowage of the HCU with two hands may damage the HCU mechanism. Let's now see a short video to illustrate that. In this video that was filmed in a full flight simulator, you can see a red cover installed on the HCU. This red cover is not certified for flight use, therefore it must be removed from the flight deck after HCU installation. The purpose of the HCU red cover is to protect the HUD and its combiner during transport and storage. During taxi phase, when the aircraft is moving, in particular at night, the flight crew will need to carefully adjust the brightness. It will enable the flight crew to improve its awareness of the surroundings and ground traffic. Let's now see a video to illustrate that. As we're about to see, we will adjust the level of brightness with the use of the rotary knob in order to have an improved view of the surroundings. Let's continue during the taxi phase. If needed, the flight crew can act on the declutter control to adjust the level of symbology that is displayed on the HCU. During the taxi phase, only one declutter mode is available by pressing one click on the declutter push button. The crosswind switch has no effect. On the A350, the declutter control button is a switch and is also located in front of the flight crew. The illustration that is on the right side shows the declutter mode in taxi. This mode can be used to better see the ground surroundings and the traffic. Let's now see a short video to illustrate how to activate the declutter mode in taxi. Here is a typical display shown during the taxi phase. In order to monitor the speed of the aircraft, the flight crew needs to monitor the ground speed. Notice that the display of the ground speed is on the right side of the speed scale. In order to monitor the energy of the aircraft, the flight crew needs to pay attention to the energy chevrons. Indeed, by looking at the position of the energy chevrons compared to the flight path vector, the flight crew will know if the aircraft is accelerating or decelerating. If the onboard airport navigation system is installed, the runway advisory indication is displayed when the aircraft is close to the runway. In the video, we see that we have an inverted T symbol displayed. This symbol is not included in the latest HUD standard and has been removed since. Let's now see a video to illustrate that. We start to see that the aircraft is accelerating. This is confirmed by the increase of the ground speed and by the energy chevrons that are above the FPV. We are about to enter the runway. Indeed, the runway ahead indication is now displayed. We now expect to turn on the right, and we notice that the aircraft is starting to decelerate. This is confirmed by the energy chevrons that are below the FPV and by the ground speed that is decreasing. Let's now move to the takeoff roll phase. As can be seen on the illustration, we are on the ground, on the runway, and the current speed is 120 knots. Aircraft is accelerating, as indicated by the trend arrow on the left side of the speed scale, and also confirmed by the energy chevrons that are above the FPV. But this is not all. As you can see, the yaw bar is displayed and indicates that the aircraft is slightly left of the runway centerline. This is also confirmed by the log deviation scale displayed below the yaw bar. The combined use of the yaw bar and the log deviation help the flight crew to perform an accurate takeoff roll. Both symbols are displayed when the flight crew sets the thrust levels to flex or toga detent position. The yaw bar is to be used as a guidance for the flight crew in order to know which rudder pedal to press to move the aircraft towards the runway centerline. The log deviation symbol indicates the position of the aircraft in relation to the runway centerline. Let's now see an example of a takeoff roll until decision speed V1. The intent of this video is to show you how the yaw bar and the log deviation symbols behave. Thus, aircraft incursions are made voluntarily. The FMAs are indicated in the upper part of the HCU, same as on the PFD. As ground speed increases and the energy chevrons are shown above the FPV, the aircraft is accelerating. This is also confirmed by the speed trend on the left-hand side of the speed scale. As the acceleration is high, the energy chevrons appear dashed because they are outside of the display area of the HCU. We can see that during its acceleration, the aircraft is going to the right side of the runway centerline. The yaw bar thus guides the flight crew to move the aircraft to the left in order to reach and maintain the runway centerline. The log deviation symbol indicates the position of the aircraft in relation to the runway centerline. Let's now continue the takeoff roll and move on to the takeoff and initial climb phases. So on the HUD, the visible field of view above the horizon is approximately 5 degrees above the horizon line when the aircraft is on the ground. This means that the takeoff pitch target is not displayed during the takeoff roll. For takeoff, the rotation technique is the same as without using an HUD. As described in the Airbus FCTM, when the rotation is initiated, the rotation rate is approximately 3 degrees per second, resulting in continuous pitch increase towards the required pitch attitude target. To monitor the rotation, the pilot flying uses the outside visual references and the HUD symbology. The pilot flying controls the pitch attitude target on the HUD. Let's now come back on the takeoff roll video. We are now at 120 knots, about to reach V1 with no failure. The pilot flying will initiate a normal rotation with an initial pitch target of 12.5 degrees as we are flying on an A350. As you can see, only 5 degrees of pitch is visible when the aircraft is on the ground. Passing rotation speed, VR, the pilot flying will initiate the rotation and target a pitch of 12.5 degrees using the aircraft reference symbol. At rotation, the pilot flying uses the pitch scale and external references to control and monitor the roll. The roll scale is displayed after liftoff when the landing gears are no longer compressed. In climb and in cruise, we do not have any specific recommendations apart from the brightness adjustment. During the cruise, the HUD may be stowed. This is left at flight crew discretion. Let's now review the approach phase. The HUD is available for all types of approaches associated to any guidance functions. When an approach is selected in the FMS and approach phase is activated, the HUD will display additional approach-related features to reinforce the flight crew situational awareness. We will now concentrate on the approach and landing phases and see, among other symbols, one of the most interesting features on the HUD. The first interesting feature is the final approach axis. It indicates a perspective view of the lock axis on the ground. It gives an indication of the aircraft position in relation to the lock axis. When the aircraft is established on the localizer, the lock axis is perpendicular to the horizon. It does not necessarily mean that the lock axis will pass through the middle of the lock deviation scale. On the horizon line is the lock course pointer. It indicates the course of the lock beam on the heading scale. The second interesting feature is the synthetic runway. The synthetic runway is a scaled representation of the runway selected in the FMS. This representation allows a smooth IMC-VMC transition by showing the flight crew where to look for the real runway. The synthetic runway appears when FMS is in approach phase, the flight crew presses LS push button on the FS control panel, and the GPS is available. The synthetic runway will disappear when the aircraft reaches a given minima value as defined by the HUD standard specification. If no decision height or decision altitude has been selected, the synthetic runway will disappear before landing. Let's now see a video during which we will see an ILS interception, the lock axis, the lock course pointer, and the synthetic runway. During the video, pay attention to the lock deviation which is displayed on the lower middle part of the HCU. By only looking at the lock axis, the flight crew may not know on which side of the runway the aircraft is. To confirm the aircraft position, the flight crew needs to look at the lock deviation as well. When the video starts, the aircraft is turning to the left in order to intercept the localizer. We can now start to see the lock axis, the lock course pointer, and the synthetic runway. By looking at the lock axis, you may have the feeling that the aircraft is on the right side of the runway. However, by looking at the lock deviation, it enables to confirm that the aircraft is on the left side of the runway. The lock axis is now perpendicular to the horizon. Aircraft is established on the localizer. The glide slope has been captured. Aircraft is now established on the ILS. When the aircraft approaches the terrain or the runway, the flight crew can adjust the level of display of the symbology. To do so, the flight crew can use the declutter modes. Here is a view of the normal mode display. Let's now see the declutter mode level 1. The declutter mode level 1 enables the flight crew to remove the synthetic runway, the approach axis, and the touchdown point or the FLS anchor point from the display. By acting on the declutter selector one more time, the flight crew will display the declutter mode level 2. As you can notice, we know that we're in declutter mode level 1 as there is a D letter symbol displayed on the lower right-hand side corner of the HCU. Let's now see the declutter mode level 2. The declutter mode level 2 can be used to focus on external parameters when flying stabilized trajectory in VMC conditions, with the use of the speed and altitude information displayed on the HCU. As you may notice, the vertical speed is not displayed in this mode. By acting on the declutter selector one more time, the flight crew will return to the full normal display. The use of the declutter mode level 1 and mode level 2 is left at the flight crew discretion. Let's now see an example of the use of the declutter mode level 1 and mode level 2 during approach. We start the video in normal display. We now have set the declutter mode level 1 and we have now set the mode level 2. In the event of a high crosswind during approach and landing, the runway and the flight path vector may be either hidden, appeared as dashed, or blocked. In order to maximize the field of view below the horizon and avoid these interactions, a specific display mode called crosswind mode was created. This mode is accessible through the normal crosswind switch in front of the flight crew. The pilot flying can use the crosswind mode if there is a need to clear lateral borders of the field. By doing so, the flight crew can fly the FPV without interfering with the speed and the altitude scales. Here is a view of the crosswind mode. In this mode, the speed scale, the altitude scale, the vertical speed and the vertical deviation scale has been moved above the horizon, and the size of the speed and the altitude scales reduced significantly. Declutter and crosswind display modes can be also combined. Notice that the crosswind selection has no further effect on the declutter mode level 2. The crosswind mode is to be used at flight crew discretion. We do not provide any crosswind value at which it has to be set. Let's now see an example of the use of the crosswind mode. When we start the video, the HUD is already set with declutter mode level 1. In order to better show you the interest of using the crosswind mode, the crosswind value used in the simulator have been manually increased. We now see that the crosswind coming from the right hand side is increasing and the flight path vector appears as dashed, which means it is hidden. By setting the crosswind mode, we now have the scales above the horizon line and a better view of the trajectory and the energy of the aircraft. Let's now move to the landing phase. The HUD helps the flight crew to perform an accurate landing. This is due to the fact that the stabilization on the final descent path is more accurate as the aircraft approaches the touchdown point. The pilot flying will perform a conventional flare. The flight crew uses external parameters and looks through the HCU. The HUD does not provide flare guidance, so flare reminder symbol does not help to perform accurate landing. However, during landing, a set of two arrows, called the flare reminder, is displayed above both sides of the flight path vector. The two arrows appear and pulse when the aircraft is above a given radio altimeter altitude, depending on the aircraft flown. Let's now see an example of that. The video will start after passing the minimum. That is to say that the synthetic runway will no longer be displayed. We can see that when the aircraft is on the glide path, the flight path vector, the final approach FPA, and the touchdown point are aligned. At 40 knots above ground, the flare reminder symbol will be displayed on the wings of the flight path vector. At touchdown, the yaw bar and the log deviation are displayed in order to control the landing roll on the runway. As for the takeoff roll, the combined use of both symbols, the yaw bar and the log deviation, enable to perform an accurate landing roll. Let's now see a video. We are now at the gate at the parking stand. The HCU will be stowed. As for its deployment, the HCU must be operated with one hand only. The flight crew should use the hand located on the side of the HCU handle. The stowage of the HCU with two hands may damage the HCU mechanism. As a reminder, the HCU red cover is not certified part for flight and therefore must be removed. The purpose of the HCU red cover is to protect the HUD and its combiner during transport and storage. This video was filmed in a full flight simulator. Let's now move to the key recommendations for the operational use of the HUD. As we have just seen, the HUD can be used in all flight phases. In order to avoid the incorrect usage of the HUD, there are 4 key points to be considered during each flight phase. The sitting position is the first one. A correct sitting position is highly important to see the full HUD symbols. Indeed, the HUD symbols correspond to the field of view of the flight crew in addition to visual cues acquisitions in marginal visibility conditions. For more information on the sitting position, you can find them in the Airbus FCTM as well as in the Safety First magazine issued in January 2018 and in the Airbus Win video What About Pilot Sitting Position. The second key recommendation is the brightness setting. Adjusting the brightness is to ensure that outside visual information and symbology can be correctly seen. The HUD symbols brightness needs to be continuously adapted to the external visual condition and phase of flight, particularly at night. The third key recommendation is to look through the HCU. Mental process must be built up for the flight crew so that earthly references remain primary source of information when visual. At any time, if the flight crew feels the need, the flight crew can revert to the PFD to maintain adequate level of awareness. The last key point is the scaling. The HUD is a conformal view of the outside world. That is to say that a variation of 1 degree in the outside world corresponds to 1 degree through the HUD field of view. Whereas on conventional instruments, such as on the PFD for instance, the variation is represented on a condensed scale. For flight crew used to fly on PFD only, any change in aircraft attitude may appear expanded on the HUD. Let's now move on to the final part. In this section, I will provide you with the latest and future HUD enhancements. In this slide, we will see the latest and main HUD enhancements. On the next 3 slides, on the right side is displayed the information concerning the HUD standard at which the enhancement will be or is available. We have enhanced the symbology. The final approach FPA symbol logic has been changed and harmonized with the A350. The selected FPA as well. The FLS distance to the anchor point has been added in order to allow the flight crew to check the consistency between altitude, the flight path angle and the distance during approach. We have as well enhanced the landing parameter symbols by providing engine and reverser management symbol to inform the flight crew on the engine configuration and landing, as well as in case of rejected takeoff. The crosswind mode display has been enhanced to introduce the concept of the free cage FPV mode symbol. This optional symbology was developed based on the feedback from HUD users as the FPV sensitivity in high crosswind condition was found too high. With this display mode, the FPV has a new shape, wingtips and no tail, and is locked on the heading on the lateral axis. When the ghost of the free FPV symbol is displayed, a star-shaped symbol which represents the FPV components, that is to say the FPA and the drift, then the speed and altitude scales will be reduced below 2500 radio altimeter in order to enhance visibility. This new symbology can be activated by pin programming. As being optional, the installation and the activation of the free cage FPV mode will be done in addition to the installation and the activation of the HUD standard. There will be as well the installation of the free cage switch on the glare sheet to replace the normal crosswind switch. It will be done with an on-demand service bulletin. We have as well introduced the ground speed display in approach. This is to better assess the impact of the wind on the aircraft energy during approach and landing in case of wind shear or swirling winds. The ground speed is displayed at minimum decision altitude or minimum 8. We have also enhanced the synthetic runway, mainly the accuracy. The synthetic runway computation requires the aircraft GPS position, and FMS position is used in the current standard. Thus, the synthetic runway symbol calculation has been enhanced. New calculation for its display is based on enhanced aircraft position direct from GPRS and is enriched with ILS information. However, this enhancement will not be sufficient to remove the need to use the declator mode level 1 when passing 1000 feet above the ground, except in air-nav approach, as the synthetic runway may not fully overlay real runway in some cases. Before going to the conclusion, let's now review the future enhancements. We are working on the pitch target box. The intent will be to provide an optimized pitch target to perform the rotation maneuver using the pitch symbol before transition to the flight in trajectory and the use of the FPV. The A350 is the leader for the development of the function. Here are two illustrations to show you how the pitch target will be working. The aircraft reference symbol needs to be captured by the pitch target box. We are as well working on the TCAS symbol in case of resolution advisory is triggered. This is already available on a military aircraft on the A400M but not on a civil aircraft. For the time being, in case of a TCAS error is triggered, the flight crew will need to revert to the PFD. To conclude, in 2018, Airbus initiated a survey to collect feedbacks from HUD trainers and HUD users. Based on your feedbacks from the field, we have identified guidelines and key recommendations for the use of the HUD that have been presented to you. These updates are available to you in the FCOM and the FCTM that was released in December 2019. As we have seen, there are 4 key aspects to be considered when using the HUD in all flight phases: the scaling, the brightness, the mental picture, and the seating position. Lastly, the HUD contributes to significantly enhance the pilot's situational awareness, particularly during the approach and landing phases, by displaying trajectory-related symbols superimposed to the field of view of the flight crew. However, the navigation display remains the prime instrument for monitoring the aircraft position in relation to the area overflown and other traffic. This now concludes this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.